Philotical, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Philotical Podcast. Today we have a special guest, Mr. Alfred Tora. Alfred, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Would you mind introducing yourself to the guests?
Yes, my name is Alfred Tora. I come from the island of Koro. That's where my dad is from, Koro, and we have ties to Dakuiloa, Oniata, in the province of Lau. My mother, I tell people that my mother comes from paradise. She comes from Peptirutuma. I was born in the Kingdom of Tonga. I was raised in Fiji, and I consider myself a son of Fiji. I have a beautiful wife, Grace, and we have three energetic boys.
You know, being born in Tonga and having heritage in Rotuma, how has that shaped your identity?
I'm glad you asked that because I feel blessed that I have these different backgrounds. Coming from having my mother being of Rotuman descent is it's really important in how it shaped my perspective of how women should be treated. Rotuman culture is if it's not equal, it's more matriarchal. We place importance on the women, especially our mothers and our mother-in-laws, and having my mother raise me up in that culture, it's helped me to appreciate and to understand the importance of women in our lives. Being born in Tonga, I went back in 2016 because my dad was working there. It's helped me appreciate spirituality because I feel like Tonga is a more spiritually founded society. Like, for example, on Sundays, there's nothing that's open. You can't make noise, and so it's helped me find my grounding in spirituality, not in religion, in spirituality. Yeah.
And that emphasis on the matriarchal culture of some Pacific traditions, right? You sort of have this perception that it's always patriarchal, and especially in the Fijian society where the men are viewed as leaders in the household, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that's a modern concept?
Well, that's interesting that you asked that because I heard a sermon from the Reverend James Bhagwan. If you get the opportunity to sit on his sermons, he's very he's such a great storyteller, and he talked about how it's something that came with religion, specifically Christianity, where the founders of Christianity as we know it now, they inserted patriarchal assertion, in their teachings. And he talked about how in the early churches history, it was more balanced. They had terms that you would refer God with that was female, of feminine. You had terms that you would address for his masculine traits, Heavenly Father's masculine traits. But because of the I don't know what they felt, the reasons they wanted it to be, but the early church leaders then wanted to assert more male dominance, and so they started to shut down or refrain from using feminine terms, and they started using masculine terms, which has carried on to today. And I've talked with someone like Master Simone Sebunendre, who's an indigenous knowledge keeper. That's what he likes to, he terms himself, about the indigenous Fijian culture. And he said prior to Christianity coming, it wasn't this way. We also uplifted the women. We viewed them as being more than men because of their ability to give life, and I feel that's something we should come back to. We should go back to. Yeah.
So in this context, when you refer to how God has feminine traits and masculine traits, which traits are you specifically talking about?
So I'm not able to articulate it as well as Reverend James Bhagwan. I'm not a theologian, but he talked about how even the names of how you would call Heavenly Father, you would call God, and he talked about, I think the one one of the traits that he said was a feminine term was philo. So you know how they talk about Heavenly Father and Sophia. You know, I don't know if you heard, there's a cathedral. I don't know where it is. I think it's in Jerusalem, or is it? But it's called the Sophia Hagia, and it's that term. Sophia is their term of God. Sophia is a feminine term of God, yeah, and he was saying how that's something that even the terms that we use today in religion, if we wanted to, you know, change the way religion is more masculine focused, we'd have to change. We should start by reverting back to these feminine terms that were used in early churches.
And you know, some would use the concept of sola scriptura, where they refer to the scripture itself as the truth, and then denominations later on have their own traditions and their own ways of practicing Christianity, right? So do you make a distinction between the scripture, what the scripture says, or do you find identity in those churches and denominations?
Yeah, I think, well, for me...
But before that, are you a man of faith?
I consider myself a man of a spiritual man.
But do you put you on the spot here? But do you believe in God?
I do believe in God. I do believe in God, and the reason I say a spiritual man is I don't feel like, and this goes back to your question, I don't feel like we should be, you know, distinguishing different denominations. I think denominations is something that you know, takes away our focus from what's really important, and that's, you know, having a better relationship with Heavenly Father or God or however you call it. And that's why I consider myself spiritual. I don't consider myself religious, in that I don't feel that we should focus too much and discriminate too much between the practices of these different religions or different denominations. I feel that what's important is your relationship with Heavenly Father. And yeah, but like I said again, I'm not a theologian, and this is still I'm still discovering my relationship with Heavenly Father. But yeah.
You know, speaking of relationship, or in Fijian, Veiwekani, right? The relational. You have on record said that that's one word that you would really like to be identified with. So for those people who do not really understand or grasp the concept of Veiwekani, how would you define it?
I would define it as how you would treat someone other than yourself. You know, I think Veiwekani is something where it defines how you act towards anyone that's not you. You know, and for example, if we don't, Veiwekani is the Indigenous Fijian term. We could talk about, you know, the family. You could talk about the community. That's all Veiwekani. You know, how you build that relationship with someone. Veiwekani is that. It's the process of building that relationship. It's the process of then preserving that relationship, maintaining it. That process of Veiwekani, as I said, is an Indigenous Fijian term. There is a term in that the Samoans use, and the Tongans use it as well, va. And va is the relationship, and in the relational. And with va, it's the concept of the relational space. So the space they talk about this sacred space between you and a person that you are trying to build that relationship with. You need to respect that space, you know, respect the boundaries within, and a physical manifestation of that. And this is something that my wife was able to teach me when she was going through her masters as well. Is that a physical manifestation of that is when, in the Samoan culture, when the woman is dancing in front. Then when people come and they shower her with gifts, then they move back and then they dance beside her, but they leave this space between them. And that's what va is, that physical manifestation. You respect her space, you respect her as a person, and you give space for her to, you know, showcase her strengths, which in this case is the dance. And then you are there as an admirer and as a supporter of her. And that's what Veiwekani should be for us as well. You know, we respect our spaces, we support each other, you know, we try and build each other up. because when in the process of building someone else up, you're able to learn more about yourself, which is why I feel Veiwekani is such an important term and an important practice that we should be striving towards more.
It's more like a complementary term where you are present in that person's life and where you interact with them, but you don't necessarily dominate or control them. Would that be a fair?
Yes, exactly. This relationship is important, and that concept itself, or that term that you talked about, or that definition, it applies to everything. Your relationship with your children, that space, your relationship with people that are in your community, and especially those that are not part of the community, or whatever community that you've defined yourself in. That relationship is also important. And having that concept or that understanding that we are all integral in building a society, that's something that I feel is lost now. Even though we have this term Veiwekani, we aren't practicing the whole of it. Every aspect of that concept.
And early on we briefly talked about matriarchal relationships. And speaking of matriarchal relationships, someone who has been at the core of your identity is your grandmother, Tesa Mataika, right?
Yes.
So how has her relationship with you defined your identity and your values?
So with my grandmother, she was really, really religious, as I said prior to this. And she's always, even though she's passed, I keep referring to her in the present tense, but she helped me understand my relationship with Heavenly Father more. And when we talk about matriarchs, all the women in my life have all contributed to who I am today. I can't say that I did self-development and I've become this person because of all that I've done. My grandmother helped me with my spirituality. My mother helped me with define my spirit, how, in terms of how resilient I am to disruptions and conflict and challenges that I have in my life. My mother is a very strong woman, and I feel I get that from her. My wife has taught me a lot about patience. She's taught me a lot about being humble. Whenever I feel that I'm getting big-headed, she says that it's her job to make sure that I'm grounded, for me to understand the important things in life, such as my children. Sometimes I forget about, I get too focused with work and with school that she has to remind me that I'm doing this for them, and I'm doing this for my family and my community. And so that's what I feel, I get from that matriarchal influence in my life. Spirituality, my spirit as an individual, and focusing on the right, having the right focus in my life. And that's all from women in my life that that have contributed to building who I am today.
Considering all these values that you've picked up on and developed from people around you, and your culture as well, was it a big culture shock when you moved out to Utah?
It was, because if there's one place in the United States that could be, you would say, be the opposite of Fiji, it's Utah. It's high up in the mountains. It's a desert. You have snow. It's a majority white state, meaning that I think it's around like 80% of, well, they call it Caucasian in the United States. But it's interesting that even there, even on the opposite side of the world, in a different culture, you still have community. You still have people that are from Fiji. You still have people from Samoa. You have people from Tonga, and we had a small community there, small community of Fijians, but they were a concentrated form of what we have in Fiji here. I think when we're in Fiji, we take relationships for granted. Being far away from family, you had to rely on the community that you had. I was blessed, my wife was blessed that we were blessed that we had people that she grew up with. She's a member of we are members of Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but she grew up in that church. And so we had classmates of hers with children that were the same age as mine. So we had friends that would come over, give us food, help us understand the system in the United States. When we had baby showers, they were there. And it wasn't just, the Fijian community. It was the church community. It was the Pacific Island community. And, that's something that I feel we may not have forgotten it in Fiji. I feel like we've taken it for granted, and we've become complacent because we've taken it for granted. We've become complacent about, what makes Fiji different. What makes Fiji unique, and that's that it's not just one demographic that helped build Fiji. It's everyone, and so we need to go back to, realizing that. And I feel that's one of the most important things that I got from being in the United States. Appreciating our uniqueness, appreciating the relationships that we have, the culture that we've built, and I feel that's if I hadn't gone to the United States, I don't think I'd be the person I am today as well. In refining who I am, and really understanding what I've been doing.
I wanted to ask you, how difficult is it for Indigenous Fijians to retain their culture outside of the country? Because if you think about it, the concept of Vanua, it's not just the physical land and soil, it's also the relationships, the kinships, the social structures that are built on it. So when you take an Indigenous Fijian out of their Vanua, and they move abroad, it must be really difficult for them to retain their culture.
Yes, that's something that I saw very quickly. But it's also the flip side of that is that you get to appreciate your culture more often. You get to then understand. So, for example, my wife, she grew up in Fiji. She's her mother's Fijian, her dad's Hutuman Kailoma. She didn't speak Fijian growing up. When she was there, then she started to learn Fijian because that's one way that she could, relate to the Fijians there. But it is difficult to maintain your culture in, overseas, in the diaspora, and also in Suba as well. One way my wife and I tried to combat that was, we tried to speak Fijian to our children. All my sons have Indigenous Fijian names with meaning. So my oldest Tuikoro, his name is, the Tuikoro there is a name that from my village, my island, and I wanted him to have that name so that he could understand where he's from. Even if he's in Utah, all the way up in the mountains, he knows that he's from Koro. My youngest, my middle child, Matake Lagi, we wanted to, which translates to, facing the heaven, trying to understand his relationship with Heavenly Father. Being an envoy for Heavenly Father for us, Matake Lagi. The youngest is Watundi, and that was something that I got from the scriptures, the Fijian scriptures about Heavenly Father's steadfastness. His relationship with us is like a firm rock, which is what Watundi translates to. And that's one way we try to, keep our culture within our families. But, it goes back to language, teaching your children languages and your language, teaching them the culture, practices, and things like that. And it is difficult. Now, I don't blame them because, you are trying to adjust to the new world. And with that, you need to, acclimatize, there's this social term called deculturalization, how immersed you become with the culture. And the United States culture is a beautiful culture. It's a mix of all the different cultures that went in, but we can make space for our own cultures. Keep our uniqueness. What makes us different. We can keep that as well. It's not just with diaspora. It's with even in Suba. Even people that didn't grow up in the village, in the literal Vanua, sometimes they even if they're close to the Vanua that they come from, they don't understand the language, they don't understand the culture, and that's not their fault. It's not their parents' fault. It's just that we have this mindset that we needed to throw our culture away in order to progress in this life, and that's not true. We can keep our culture, and it can help us progress as well.
Progress in what sense?
In terms of education, in terms of your profession. There's a lot of when I was growing up, my parents told me to speak English. When I came from Tonga, I only spoke Tongan. My grandmother said, you got to speak English. She's a product of ACS when it was still Miss Shelton was still the principal, and so they were indoctrinated in that understanding that you need to be proficient in English to progress in this world.
Mm-hmm.
While that is true, there's still space for you to use your language, use the values that you've grown up with, that's in the culture, to help you become unique. In business, and I'm sure this is, there's a term there, competitive advantage, something that another company can't replicate or duplicate, and that's what our culture is to us. We can use it as a competitive advantage to progress, develop, whatever you want to call it, as individuals and as a society. Tourism is such a great example of that. How they use Indigenous Fijian culture to draw and attract tourists. So that's one way you can use your culture to develop, economically, but also that's preserving the culture that you have. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's essentially what I was.
And you speak quite a bit about faith, and I'm not sure if you've heard of Dr. Asesela Ramuhu.
Yes.
So he has a book called Facade of Democracy, and in his book he makes claims about how Westerners and missionaries, they came to Fiji and they disrupted the culture. Do you think that Christianity has disrupted the Fijian culture, or can it be integrated with the Fijian culture and it can complement each other? Because quite clearly, the way you've explained it, I can see that it does complement your culture. So what do you have to say to that?
Yes, and I may not be the best person to be talking on this subject, but this is a question as well that I've had and I've asked, through my journey. My wife is currently working at Pacific Communities University. It's a new university. They just converted to a university, but previously they were the Pacific Theological College, and so it caters to building priests from the Catholic faith, preachers from the Methodists, the Anglicans, and so it was such a great place for my wife to be, because that's where I got to have my questions. I don't know if it was answered or maybe discussed, and a lot of discussions that are being had at Pacific Communities University is that faith, Christianity specifically, can be integrated to the Fijian faith. Again, Master Simeone Sevenendre, he talked about how when the missionaries came, they still had this concept of their God. If they had taken the time to understand what the indigenous Fijian perspective was about the gods, they would have known that this was, they could have integrated that with the current Fijian faith. I think that's something that the PCU is currently working toward, and other religious denominations here in Fiji, is that Christianity and culture can work hand in hand, and it needs to work hand in hand to address the social issues that we have. I believe that there are aspects of the indigenous Fijian culture that can work hand in hand with religion, with Christianity. But we also have to work on developing that, so that we can then address social issues that are plaguing our communities and our nation as well. A lot of the efforts focusing on social issues today are just from one perspective, from the religious perspective, from the political perspective, the government, and then the Vanua. If we had an integrated, a unified approach to each issue, that's one way that we could integrate that Christianity, the culture, and the government, which I feel, with Ratsukuna said, the three-legged stool, the Vanua, the Lutun, and the Matanitu. The people, the land, the church, and the government. They need to work together to address all these different issues that we're facing right now.
And it's like that concept of modesty. I remember in my church we had a pastor that came from India, and his definition of modesty is women, wearing a scarf. But that's also a cultural thing at the same time, because different cultures also have different definitions of what is modest, right? So I guess that's one way you can integrate religion, and sort of makes it not necessarily easier, but much more clear to follow Christianity.
Yeah, I believe that Christianity needs to be. They still work in to help us understand what Christianity is and what our culture is, and if we're able to clearly defined have a clearly defined relationship between the two, then we will have a better understanding of our relationship in this sphere. If once we understand, or once we can relate to Christianity, and once we can relate to our culture and see how they relate to each other, then we'll have a better understanding of ourselves as an individual, as a family, and as a community. Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Organizational psychology, what drew you to that?
Yeah, so organizational psychology, I tell people, I have the term psychologist, but I'm not someone that you come into my office and then you lay on the couch and then try and hypnotize you and stuff like that. My focus is more on the organization and the employees, so it's a balanced approach. We try and create organizations that are more effective in terms of their processes, in terms of how they run things, how they plan, strategically plan for the future. But we also help employees with their well-being, that's because we feel that, we know that the employees are the greatest assets of an organization. And so if we're helping the organization become more efficient, we also need to help the employee become more efficient. We work on psychological safety, having employees understand, or have that understanding that they are safe in the workplace, that they are able to trust the people around them. You may not trust them with your lives, but you can trust them enough to know that they have your back in terms of how business is being run. Yeah, and that's what we do. Our patients are the organizations and the people within the organizations, and we try and create a better environment, ecosystem for the organization to benefit and the employees as well.
And some businesses, they've introduced this position of CPO, Chief People Officer. Yeah. Apart from, you have the CEO, CFO, now it's this CPO, where, let's say, the CEO wants to fire someone, the CPO can say no, because if you fire that person, these other people that have relations with that person, they'll be disrupted, their morale will be down. Would you say your work encompasses that?
Yes, it encompasses that. It humanizes the work environment. Business as we know it now, and the business models that we follow are Western constructs. It worked in the West, but we also have to understand that their culture, as we talked about, culture influencing religion, culture also influences the business world. And so it came from the West, and the Western culture is more individualistic. And so they were more focused on efficiency, when especially in America, where commercialization and capitalism helped build what business models that we have now in this world, that we've tried to bring into Fiji. That even that position of CPO, Chief Person Officer, if that's something that we have in our cultures. In Fiji, the national culture of Fiji, we have an understanding of relationships. And that's why I feel like organizational psychology is important in the Pacific, in Fiji, is, to humanize the Western models that we've had, to understand that relationships, Veiwekani, is important. And so when you understand why, from a technical aspect, you're looking at someone's workload, you're looking at the productivity, and then you're saying, okay, this person doesn't do as much based on indicators, based on data. From that perspective, okay, you can fire them. But if you humanize, and if you work on like the Veiwekani aspect and see how this person helps 5 other people become more productive, and if you let them go, then these 5 are probably aren't going to be as productive as before. Then you can understand, okay, that's how you quantify what relationships bring to the business. It brings that that network that we have. It understands that, it isn't just what an individual does that helps the organization, it's what that group does. And if you disrupt this group by firing someone or by replacing them, then you're not just because of one individual, then you're not understanding the bigger picture, that it's the relationships that bring out productivity. Yeah.
And speaking of humanizing the workplace, you have the rise of artificial intelligence, where on one hand it does make work a lot easier. You have automated processes, websites are easier to navigate through. You can build an app in just a few minutes now, and there's also a risk of, on the other side, you have the risk of people losing their jobs. Some businesses have they've let go of their accountants because now that can be automated through AI. How do you think the rise of artificial intelligence will not only affect the workplace but also culture?
Artificial intelligence, especially in the West, is, the West is already feeling the brunt of what artificial intelligence can do now. The Pacific isn't as, we haven't gotten to that point yet in terms of technology to worry about that now. But having said that, we also have to prepare for it.
Because it's inevitable.
Yeah, it's inevitable. Whatever happens in the West is going to trickle down to the Pacific. Yeah, and so we need to first understand that artificial intelligence is it's a big disruptor to how we do business now, but it's a perfect opportunity for us to also try and develop individuals, so that when it does happen, when artificial AI does eventually come and disrupt the general business world in Fiji, we're ready for that. We have people that are more skilled, more motivated, and are willing to put in the work to be productive. I don't know if I should be saying this, but if you see a lot of, if you see the state of the workplace in Fiji, we don't have the basics down at all. So if AI were to come tomorrow, it would completely destroy the workforce in Fiji. We don't have people that are motivated. We don't have people. We're not upskilling our people, and we're not able to get them to be productive. And that's not the individual's fault. I feel that's something that society needs to work on as well. We need to understand what motivates people in Fiji, in the Pacific, and that goes back to culture. What are cultural values that we could relate to work that would help motivate this person. We have to motivate them. We have to understand what motivates them. We have to upskill them, and we have to be able to see what services and what other help we can give our employees for them to be as productive as AI. That's something that I feel Fiji and the Pacific needs to work on right now, while we still have time on our hands, while we still have that buffer, from the West, where we have a perfect environment right now to experiment on how the workforce can become resilient towards what AI would bring to this workplace, or the work environment that we have right now.
And there's this quote that I recently read on Threads. It said that artificial intelligence won't take over your jobs. It's people who use artificial intelligence that will. Do you think it's fair to say, much like how we discussed about integration between culture and Christianity, we can integrate that within our workplace so that people don't lose their jobs, but they can use artificial intelligence to retain their work?
Yeah, in the workplace, I think, like you said, AI is inevitable. Technology is inevitable. So we need to develop our people in such a way that when AI does arrive, I know it's arrived. It's arrived in the West, and it's already trickling into the Pacific. But when it does come, we've already taught them how to utilize AI, the pros and cons of utilizing it. They are able to be more productive with AI, but they also need to be careful about what they use it for. In education's already feeling the brunt of it. ChatGPT's the next best thing to bake bread, and so in the education system in Fiji, I feel the education system's already gotten that AI intervention in. Now they have to understand how to,
Do you think it's a good thing that students are using AI?
If they're using it the right way, I think it's good. If they're using it to really answer the questions that they have, help them, understand the concept better, it's good. But if you
it's much like the calculator. When the calculator came out, instead of people, using their fingers and writing long, complex additions and whatnot, they could just use the calculator. And there's also this analogy. Let's say you have a room, right? And that room is full of mud. And on one hand, you have a rag. On the other hand, you have a cotton bud. And now you had the option of
what you would choose.
I mean, the end goal would be the same, but one would be more efficient. Would you say that it's not necessarily a bad thing? It's how we utilize it?
Yes, and I liked that analogy that you used there. It's the tool itself is not bad. It's just the way we use it. It's our understanding of the uses of it. The purpose of us using it. If it's to help us become more proficient in a skill, help us broaden our understanding, then yes, it's that. In that sense, AI could be like a book. It helps you learn things. But if you're just using it as a shortcut, so that you don't have to do your homework, if you're just directly copying and pasting, and you're not actually doing your due diligence, then the only person that's going to suffer from that when you come into the workforce, come out of the school system and into the workforce, is you. Like I played rugby before. Yeah? We used to have these 10-meter shuttle runs, and they would say, you have to run there, touch the ground, come back. And then while you're running, then they'd say, if you don't touch the ground, no one's going to know. The only person that's going to know is yourself, whether you actually did the work or you didn't, because it'll show later. And that's what AI is to education right now. If you're doing it to help you become a better student, then yes, it's an amazing tool. It's an amazing resource. But if you're using it to just for shortcuts, then you won't feel it now, but later on, people will. The truth will be exposed. I
mean, some people struggle to just send a normal message without using AI.
I just started playing around with ChatGPT this year. Before I was like, oh no, I don't want to use it. It's going to take all my brain power and.
I mean, there has been a decrease in brain activity.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think in the middle of the year, I realized, I have to be cognizant, really, really be aware, have it in the back of my mind that if I let this thing, if I use this thing every time I want to send, someone a message and stuff, then it's going to be taking away my greatest gift, my cognitive ability. And that scared me. That concept that that AI could take over my brain. It could take over my imagination. That I'd have to rely on this solely to make any decision. And I feel like that's something that we need to train our students, to be aware of that. Train our teachers as well, and have that as bring in examples, negative examples, positive examples of what AI can do, so that people can have an understanding about how to use AI as a tool and the pros and cons of that. Yeah.
Okay. There's this. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. So you have artificial intelligence, and then later on, people are predicting you have artificial general intelligence, and then artificial super intelligence. I believe it's super intelligence. So artificial intelligence is what we currently have, right? ChatGPT, Gemini, and then you'll have artificial general intelligence, where AI will become sentient. And so my question to you is, when it does become sentient, would you treat it as a sentient being, or would you be like, no, it's not human, I'm not going to?
Man, I grew up watching Terminator, so I think my answer to that would be, we have to. That's why we got to keep our intellectual knowledge, our intellectual property, safe. But I feel like if that argument would have to have all the different aspects as well, religion, and your culture and the government, having that pulling from all, or having them come integrated, so that they could all inform you of how to relate to that. I feel with AI right now, I don't think it's you should classify that as a person. With ASI, right now I feel like it's not something that you can't characterize that as an individual as well, as a person as we know it. It doesn't have a soul. It doesn't have the cognitive ability that we have as people. Huh? But having said that, things could change, the world could change and stuff. But I feel like that's my standing. If even if we get to that point, my mind may change and things like that. But I feel like the core of this, from a religious perspective, I feel like it doesn't have a soul, so you can't distinguish it as an individual, as a person. And from a cultural perspective, I feel like I think the short answer would be, I don't feel like you could characterize that as a person, AI, now or ever.
Well, hopefully they don't.
Hopefully you're not listening to me.
In future,
Yeah, probably gonna get a big X against my name. Okay, this is a guy to.
We'll keep your office location confidential. Yeah, I mean, it is something of debate, and it's also something that's really scary when you actually sit down and try to comprehend it, because I think humans generally, and this is my personal belief, humans generally, they like to retain control, right? So even if AGI and ASI is inevitable, humans would still find a way to have that that sort of a level of control over it. Maybe have a switch so that it doesn't take over, and that could be placed on the evolutionary side, where you have different species competing to stay at the top.
Darwinism,
and humans have retained their control over the land and animals as well. And if you look at it from a religious perspective, God has given us authority over land, over the other animals. So it can be, I mean, humans within themselves, they also fight for control. So having a super intelligent being rising up, that could be that could raise a lot of red lights in people's minds. So how do you think nations would be able to control that?
I think there'll come a time when you won't be able to control it. Yeah, and I think it's something that if you look at literature, if you look at even the Bible, this is a core question for humanity. How can we control something that we've created? If you think about Frankenstein's monster, that's exactly what it was. If you replace Frankenstein's monster with AI and Frankenstein, the scientist, as a personification of humans.
So AI is humans, Frankenstein's monster.
Yes, humans, Frankenstein's monster. Anyway, there'll come a time, once it becomes sentient, like I said, ASI, then that's essentially what Frankenstein's monster is. It's a culmination of the creator itself. It's a personification of the creator's aspirations, his vision for the future. If it comes alive, if AI becomes ASI, and you're Frankenstein, and you're horrified about this creation that you've just made, then it'll go down, as what happened in Frankenstein. You'll be running away from a monster that's stronger than you, that's more intelligent than you, that's a sum of all these different parts that makes it a superior being to who you are. And just like with Frankenstein, if you've read the book, it haunted him all these years. And maybe that's what ASI could be. So the question I would pose is: do we want to continue down that path where we're developing AI to a point where it becomes ASI, or should we
pull the plug?
Pull the plug now. We won't have.
I think the United States has invested $350 million. I believe it's $350 million into this location where they will solely focus on the development of AI. And in part, what they are saying is that it's to advance humanity, but obviously it's to compete with other nations, right? You have China and U.S. relations, and sort of like the second Cold War,
which I feel is already underway. The Cold War. If you see what's happening now in the global stage, essentially that's what's happening. You have these major powers that aren't directly competing with each other, but they are doing that through other smaller nations, other minor players. The Pacific is a great example of that. We have China, we have the U.S., Australia, and New Zealand are like the big brother for us in the Pacific, and that's how they aren't competing directly. They're not sending warships to each other, China and the States. But what they're doing is they're doing it through diplomatic channels. They're investing in this country. They are, putting infrastructure in another. And that's an example of that. How would AI help or destroy this dynamic that we have, the Pacific? That's why I say again, Veiwekani is really important, especially so Fiji is such a small country compared to the global stage. Veiwekani is a tool that they could use more often to have strategic relationships all around it. And I'm sorry I digress from our previous topic here, but that's why I feel Veiwekani is important. Because of that, it can be used as a diplomatic tool. It can be used in business. It can be used in personal relationships, and that's why I feel so attracted to it. I feel to this concept of Veiwekani as I want to be that personification. Yeah,
the concept of Vanua and Veiwekani. I had this analogy or scenario in mind. Let's say you have your home, right? And that's the home that you grew up in. That's the home that your parents grew up in, and your grandparents, and first generation, right? The structure might have changed over time, but that piece of land, that you call home, has always been with you. The very place that you formed relationships, broken relationships, resolved relationships, and practically did everything, right? Now imagine that home got flooded once a week. every time you have a heavy rain, it gets flooded, especially with Suva's weather. So would you sit there and be like, maybe I need to move out, or would you try to do something in order to reinforce your home so that it doesn't get flooded again? And most people would say that they would reinforce their home. Why would I want to move out? This is what I identify with. This is my home. And that is happening on a much larger scale. And the people of Sarua, they would relate to that because of rising sea levels.
Yep.
And then you have the concept of involuntary mobility. People from metropolitan areas. I'm from a metropolitan area. My first instinct would be, why don't they just move out? Land is mainland is just a few hundred meters away. They could just go there and move there. But it's not as simple as that. Like you said, the concept of Vanua, it goes much deeper than just land. So what are your thoughts on involuntary immobility?
And I liked how you framed this question with both Veiwekani and Vanua. Those two go in hand. Vanua, as the Indigenous Fijians know it, as we believe what it is, it's the land, the physical land, the relationships that you have with the people on the land, the all living things on that land, the trees, the rivers. It's a concept that may seem foreign to someone in the city, in the metropolitan place, such as you and I. But if you were to replace Vanua, if you were to think your home, the physical home that you lived in, if you were to replace Vanua with that as your framework or your understanding, then you could tell, that's where Veiwekani comes in. If you're in the metropolitan area, far from the Vanua, but as you said, you lived there your whole life. You have history with the physical home. You have history with the rooms. You have memories of it. If you were told to move out, that's involuntary mobility. You wouldn't want to do that. You'd want to you'd want to reinforce your home. You'd want to do all of this. So, how can we do that? How can we reinforce that home? Reinforce. We have to be more proactive. If your home floods every week, then you have to start. Maybe start. Putting sandbags. Maybe start putting contingencies in.
And I believe they've already started doing that.
Yeah, and so it's not an easy thing to do. To move out, to be told that you have to relocate. So first, if you're talking about preventative measures, I would think that you have to bring in the local context. You have to bring the local understanding. So most of the times we just have governments coming in, NGOs coming in, trying to relocate the people, not thinking about asking for their insights about ways to prevent climate change in the context of their Vanua. If that's the preventative measures, that if you have to focus on preventative measures, but if you have to focus on if you're committed to moving them to another location, ask them again. It still goes back to the Veiwekani that they have in that community. They probably have another location in mind, that still is situated in the Vanua, that still keeps them spiritually and culturally and emotionally connected. Then maybe follow their suggestion. But yes, if for anyone in this world, if you would tell them that they had to move away from the place that they have history with, they probably won't be able to do it. They'd probably opt to die in that land. And that may seem tragic to most people in the world, but if you were to ask them, they wouldn't think that that's tragic at all. They'd feel like that's the culmination of their life. If they were born there, they'd probably want to be buried there as well. Yeah, and maybe it's our savior complex that where we would want to just come in and try and save them, push them to another community so that they live. But is that selfish on our part? If we are trying to if we come in saying, okay, we know what's best, let's take you out, is that saving them? You may be saving them physically, but do you think that they'd be happier being in a foreign, on foreign land, far from the homes of their ancestors? Or do you think, how would their well-being be affected if you were to move them, physically remove them, because you say that you know what's best? That's why we need to always include their insights, their suggestions, their Veiwekani, both to the Vanua and to wherever you feel like you should be moving them to. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And if it doesn't, then I'm sorry.
And with what you've said, you mentioned how it's not as simple as the government just going in there and implementing policies to help them, right? Help them. And I guess that's where the concept of Veitalanoa also comes in. You have Western means of trying to gather information and, just coming in and asking them like a normal interview, whereas with Talanoa, where you sit down, you introduce yourselves, and you sort of get into the personal, and you don't have any time limits there. You in that way, I believe you're able to gather more information and more necessary information. And that's something that's deeply rooted with the Fijian culture as well, that some cultures have also adopted. Do you think it would be beneficial for the government and the bureaucrats within that government to just go and sit down with people and talk to them?
I don't know how you're doing this. I feel like you reaching into my brain and to my mind and pulling this, but I like how you used Veitalanoa. Veitalanoa, and this is something that I've recently learned myself. I've always used Talanoa as the term, but then someone just I was talking to someone and they said, Talanoa is more like in the Fijian term you say au Talanoa manda. When you say au Talanoa manda, it's more one way. When you use the word Veitalanoa, that's when it becomes, two-way. It becomes where, you're not only talking to a person. The Veitalanoa aspect comes where you both, you're sharing your thoughts and they're sharing theirs, yeah? And I feel it's an important tool with politicians, especially for politicians, to understand the people they're representing. They need to come and have these Veitalanoa sessions. But you also have to, when you're doing this, you also have to come with the right intentions. If you're just coming there for show and you're just having these Veitalanoa sessions just to, show face, you're probably not going to be learning anything. That's why Veitalanoa, when you come into a space where there's Veitalanoa, you have to come with an open mind. You have to come with a mind that's, with a mind that's open and willing to change your stance if you present it with the right information that can help change your perspective. If you're coming in already with a closed mind and you are just coming in to, have this token Veitalanoa session and then you are arguing most of the time, that's not Veitalanoa, that's something else. Because you've come in with your mind already made up, and it would have been, then that makes that, that diffuses what Veitalanoa can do. That's why you have to come in with the right intentions, with the right mindset to any Veitalanoa session. And I really hope that, current politicians and future politicians use this in their campaign. Veitalanoa, get to know the people, not just come in and extract, their insights, their knowledge, their votes, and then move on. Because then, if that's the case, then that's just, neo-colonialism. You're doing exactly what the colonialists did to us, where they come and extract. Veitalanoa is where you come, you talk with them, you share with them, help them, and get help yourself. Get insights from them. It's all about what they need to do and what needs to be done in their community.
It's interesting you mentioned extract. With colonialism, you had colonial powers extracting resources and labor. With neo-colonialism, it's extracting, information without having anything in return. And with Talanoa, I guess, and I'm just guessing, like most people would have a perception that it's informal and unstructured. It's just like a friendly chat. But it's really not. Like when you hear people explain about Talanoa, there is a structure to it.
There is a structure. You come in. Dr. Unasinambombomba, who is the current VC for Fiji National University, she created a framework called the Vanua Research Framework, which uses Veitalanoa. When we talk about Veitalanoa, we think about just one instance, but Veitalanoa is a process. You come in, you introduce yourself, you introduce the intentions of your visiting there, of your wanting to have this Veitalanoa. You have the Veitalanoa, you have these learning periods where you're learning and they're learning as well. I think the important part that most people aren't getting is that Veitalanoa doesn't just end there. You then go do whatever you need to do in terms of research. You go do your data analysis, you do your findings, you do your presentations. The part that's missing is the last part, where we go back to the community. We go back to the community and we share with them what we've learned from them and help them understand how it can be implemented in their community. That's the last part that I feel personally is missing in politics, in research, in education. That closing that loophole, that loop. Closing that loop is that Veitalanoa loop that we have. We're not closing it. We're not going back and sharing our insights from their thoughts, their inputs. So that we have this Veitalanoa session, but we're not closing the loop.
And it sort of brings back to our discussion on matriarchal qualities and patriarchal qualities. For men, I think as men, most men are oriented towards solutions and just finding the right answer. Whereas when you have the feminine side, it's not just about getting the answers and solutions. It's also understanding how we can get those solutions and how would it be appropriate to these people. Just getting to know more in depth about the people that are involved within that context. And I guess you can say that's a very, very cultural thing, right?
Yeah, and I like how we're talking about culture here, but that is exactly what we talked about with business. The Western model is more the patriarchal model, where we're just focusing on the solutions and things like that. The models that we have, in our cultures, in the Pacific especially, is more that matriarchal perspective, where we're focusing on humanizing the person, focusing on the bigger picture, the broader picture, and then trying to figure out solutions and how they work. And I feel that if we use that both in business or in the government, then the world will be a better place. If we can humanize the individual, not just view them as a number. If we can actually get to know them, get to know their plights, their what they are facing each day, then we can probably create the right solutions for them. And as I said, it's not just with politics. It's with business. It's with education. I feel it's a life. That's a life value. Having the ability to have empathy for the person, and the ability to have that broader picture in mind, and finding ways to connect everything together.
With you being a big defender of cultural preservation, right? So I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. All right, you brace yourself. With culture, people would argue that not all aspects of culture is good or was good. Back in the day before the Westerners actually came to Fiji, you also had intertribal warfare. You had things like cannibalism going on. So how do you differentiate between what is good about a culture and what is bad? What moral framework do you use to differentiate that?
And I want to answer this first by saying I'm not. I wouldn't say a big defender. I'm still trying to learn my. This is a learning journey as well for me. When I talk about culture preservation, I'm not talking about pulling, extracting that whole culture that we had before Christianity and then trying to implement it in this modern society. That wouldn't work. I feel like what my approach would be to pull the right things. Pull the right things, like as you said, pull the right things within our culture, the right values, the right practices, the right processes, and then trying to figure out how it
But
integrates
how do you
to modern
know
society.
which values are
And
right?
so and with that, I think that comes in with when in order to do that, I think that's where the religion comes in. That or your religious beliefs. That that you would use religion as a framework. Then you would see, like you said, cannibalism bad, Veiwekani good, as a general framework. When we're talking about morality itself morality seems like a product of, and not the not a process towards trying to focus on trying to help culture. Because morality, an individual's morality, is a product of their culture, their religion, their political affiliations and things like that. That's where your morality comes from. When we talk about culture itself, I think to flip it back, it would be, I feel it's something that the people that observe the culture the people as a whole, that community, that group that observe this particular culture, we all need to come together in order to make this assessment of what's good and what's bad, and then we can be able to then pull out what's good and then work on what's bad. I know I haven't answered your answer, because I feel I haven't answered your question, because I think that's a philosophical question that would probably take more people than me, which is why I say we need to come together as a group, not just Indigenous Fijians, but Fiji as a whole. We need inputs so that we're able to see what is worth keeping, and those that aren't worth keeping, we also need to address it. We can't just pull out what's good and then try and throw away what's bad, or try and hide the fact that those things were practiced. We need to address these issues. We need to figure out how we can address these issues, but also how the cultural values that we are bringing in is able to integrate with modern society. I have a friend that's I feel like I'm in the middle. I'm in the middle of those that want to just pull out just bring the whole culture, uproot it out, and then plant it straight into what we have today. Then we have those that just feel like culture as a whole doesn't have a part in society. I feel like I'm in the middle. I feel like there is a way we can bring culture into the modern society and use it for our competitive advantage. I still don't know how we would be able to assess what's good and what's bad. I mean, we already know in the general sense what's good and what's bad because of Christianity, as we've talked about. Christianity being that broad overview where we have a general idea of what's good and what's bad. Now we have to just come in together as a group to really firmly place our foot, draw the line on what's good and what's bad, and then work on how to use what's good in modern society and how to address what's bad. Talking about that's where culture comes in. Yeah, I'm talking about, for example, I think the past 2 weeks, I'm not sure when, but recently, the chairman of the Great Council of Chiefs, Mbasilewu Wakaturana, Ratu Vilame Servakula, he talked about how we can't use traditional processes in order to. So he was talking about the sexual assault and domestic violence in the Fijian in the Indigenous Fijian community. How
The
people
harsh
have been,
culture.
and how they've been using how they've been using traditional methods of forgiveness to avoid being taken to law, taken to court. He's saying how you can't be using that anymore. He placed his foot down. He was able to do that because he's in the Fijian society, in the Indigenous Fijian society. He's at the top of this, being the chairman of the Bosilewu Wakaturang, the BLV or the GCC. That's what I feel. That's an approach I feel we need to have. We need to have the Vanua come in. We need to have the church come in, and we need to have government come in and place, and help us place that assessment, help us, with that moral framework that we have, or that you were asking for.
The more you know, that the less you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You have anti-colonialists, like super hardcore anti-colonialists, who make the argument that Christianity was used as a means to bring about Western values, and that could have been the case. And then on the other side, you have the right wing of politics, as some would say, the conservatives and the traditionalists, where they would throw away culture altogether. And it's quite interesting that you take a nuanced approach.
Yeah.
And it's not usual for people to do that.
Yeah, but I feel, and that's where what we're talking about, that's where my upbringing comes into play, because I've got my perspective from the Tumen culture, Indigenous Fijian culture. I was born in Tonga. I had experiences in the United States. I feel I'm more moderate. If I had it my way, I would want to have us, integrate everything and find for the right, and integrate everything and put it into context to find the right solutions. I know I can't. I know, I've got friends that would agree with me that I can't try and find the middle ground with everything, but I feel like we can. I feel like it's with effort we can. It's just that people aren't willing to actually come together and have discussions, have this Veitalanoa, where you come in with an open mind, you come in with the right intentions to find solutions for these things. Fiji, I feel, has lost its way in that we know about these terms, Veitalanoa, but we're not actually practicing it. If we could do that for things like this, to focus on actually figuring out how culture can be placed in society, then we'd go a long way. If we could come together as a people to figure out and address things like racial tension, things like land tenure, things like education. We could make it, if we made the effort as a people to address these issues, we can. It's just that we've become people. I feel like we are people now of. We have people on each hill, not willing to come down and have this Veitalanoa. We have this bunker. We're set up. We've set up our defenses, and we're not willing to have people come in and have these Veitalanoa sessions. And maybe it's all right to come down from that hill. We would rather die on that hill feeling that we are right, rather than actually coming together as a people and paving the right way forward. And and that saddens me, and that's why I feel we need to try and maintain who we are. If we can actually focus on things like Veitalanoa, Veiwekani, then we'd probably be, like what Serevi used to call us, Fiji the way the world should be. That can't happen if we're all having Talanoa. We're just talking, it's one way, and not Veitalanoa, where we're actually coming in and wanting to learn from each other. Fiji can be a beautiful place. It is a beautiful place physically, but it can be a much beautiful place if we all came together as a people and made the effort to actually want to move forward. Yeah.
And then you said that very beautifully. With identity, I guess me as an Indo-Fijian and the rest of the Indo-Fijian diaspora in Fiji and other parts of the world, they've been struggling to find their identity. And some Indo-Fijians would say, it's, they find it difficult explaining to people that they identify with Fiji because they're not Fijian enough. And they find it difficult to identify with India because they're not Indian enough. Some Indians wouldn't accept Indo-Fijians. So how do you think the Fijian society should address that, if they should?
Yeah, see, with me, like I've said again, I come from, my mother's Rutuman, my dad's Fijian. I've had this identity crisis myself growing up. I didn't feel like I was in place in a lot of my Rutuman family's culture activities because I don't know Rutuman. No, I look Rutuman, but I don't speak it. And in the Fijian, with my Fijian family, I found it hard as well because I don't look Fijian as much as they do. And it took me a while to try and go over that identity crisis myself. Fiji as a whole, I think one perfect example is which hasn't been the case recently in Fiji's recent past, is rugby sevens. I think that's the greatest equalizer. When Fiji was winning, that was the greatest equalizer of Fijians as a whole. One of the last pictures I took before I went to the United States was a picture of there was the sevens going on. There was a TV outside on Turak, right by where this new building is now. It wasn't this organization before, but there was a TV outside, and there was all kinds of Fijians there, all watching the same game, all jumping up, cheering, all having the best 14 minutes of their lives for that week or something. Fiji won that day. When I saw that, I that's the Fiji that I want. Growing up with my own identity crisis, that's the Fiji that I want. A Fiji where everyone is cheering for the same team, cheering for the same people. They may not be able to relate to whoever's on the TV physically, with physical characteristics, but the people that they are cheering for represent all of us. And that's something that you go to any sevens games in the world, and I've seen people make this argument, and I can attest to this. Any sevens game in the world, you don't see the skin color. All you see is the baby blue, sky blue, and that's the Fiji that I think we should start trying to work towards. Not one that's racially divided, not one that's divided because of religion, not one that's divided by community. It should be all blue, and that's why I love using sevens as an example. It's unfortunate that sevens hasn't been up to par recently. I don't blame them. But if we can have that type of picture of everyone in Fiji cheering for the same team, regardless of color, having all you're seeing is that sky blue, then Fiji would be a better place. Like I said, Veiwekani, not just Veiwekani within your community. That's not what Veiwekani means. Veiwekani means Veiwekani with everyone. Your relationship with everyone and everything, not just the land, not just the trees, but the people as well. And if we are able to get across this, and I'm hopeful for that, I'm hopeful that I'll be able to see that as in this lifetime, then I'd feel that it would justify my telling my children that Fiji is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And yes, I hope we can get to that. And and I hope that if we can all come together, one by one, start small, then I'm sure that we can get there.
There's this that reminded me of this meme. So you had two groups of people, right? And the first group were looking at people of different races, and they were identifying with people of that race, and the caption was, that's me, I identify with that. And then below that was another group. They were looking at a bunch of transformers, and just action heroes and characters. And then the caption was, that's literally me. So it's not necessarily that they were identifying with that they are robots or something, but the fact that they find it cool, and due to the fact that they collectively find it awesome, they can relate to each other in a better way, and that's I guess you can relate that to rugby, where everyone just comes in and cheers as a collective, and sort of gets rid of that idea of being super individualistic and just your own person. And it's especially with I guess with my community, the Indo-Fijian community, even though it's difficult to fit into greater society, it's something as simple as throwing a ball to someone else. That it's so easy for us to become united because of that. Do you think people are overcomplicating unity a bit too much?
I feel this is why I say that I'm moderate. I feel that people are either overcomplicating it or oversimplifying it. Oversimplifying it in the sense that they talk about, Fijians, the term Fijian, they're oversimplifying it, saying, that means that we're going to lose all our cultures. That's not the case. We can keep our cultures. And then overcomplicating by saying, we need to really stick between ethnic lines and social lines and things like that. When we talk about unity, when we talk about like Fiji, we can do both. We can do all of that. We can keep our cultures, but we shouldn't let our cultures refrain us from treating the other person as a Fijian. We can use our cultures, our individual cultures, which I think we should all keep. Our different cultures, the good aspects. Keep all of our different cultures unique, and it can help us in our contributions in making Fiji unique. Fiji isn't just one culture. Now, Fiji is a land of different people, and if we can help motivate, just like with business, if we can actually figure out what motivates each person to building a better organization, which in this case is Fiji, then we can find the right solutions for it. We can find the right way forward. We are just too stuck on being overcomplicated or oversimplifying, and that's why I feel like more people need to find that middle ground. Realize that there are things more important that we should be focusing on, not just the superficial things, not just the surface stuff. There are things there are issues that are going on right now in our society that we need to really focus on. The drugs, the AIDS, the HIV pandemic, and things like that. So yes, I feel like people are overcomplicating things. I feel people are oversimplifying things. We just need to have more Veitalanoa. I feel like a lot of this division is caused by not understanding the other side of the things, the other empathy. That's why we need to have more Veitalanoa sessions, more awareness of what you want and what you want in this place of Fiji, and then understanding what the other person wants, and then seeing that middle ground. I
think with things like drug epidemic in Fiji, we only look at how many people are being affected by drugs. We don't actually look at the why. For example, when we have a headache and our first instinct is to take Panadol because obviously the headache goes away. But we never sit down and ask ourselves, why do we have that headache in the first place? Could be because it was a hot day. Could be because we haven't drank enough water. Do you think things like Talanoa, Veitalanoa would be beneficial in actually solving the drug epidemic?
I think it's a good start. I feel like with Veitalanoa, you use Veitalanoa as that platform to understand the issues, the actual root causes, the actual.
What do you think is the issue?
Well, for me, I grew up. I had, in my past, I had issues with, drugs. Following when I was when I was younger. I was lost and things like that. For me personally, it was that, feeling pain. Feeling left out, not knowing my place in society, and in my family as well. So I feel like that's something that could be a root cause for a lot of people. Feeling out of place and not understanding where they belong. And with the psychological background, I'm not a psychotherapist where you focus on things like that. But as a psychologist, I feel like, and you've talked about it, you've talked about it perfectly about finding the root causes. A root cause, I feel, for a lot of people is the pain, not understanding their place. And so using Veitalanoa as that platform to actually identify, what really is causing this is a great start. But then we need to start actually doing the work. If we just focus on Veitalanoa, then we're just going to be a land of people sitting around and chatting. We're not going to be actually making progress, not actually acting. Faith without works is dead. And so if we're just having these Veitalanoa sessions and having faith that that's going to be okay, then we're actually not going to find the solutions. And we need to find it fast if we, especially with the drug problem and everything else.
Let's say I'm someone who is struggling with drugs, right? And you being a believer in the method of Veitalanoa to actually understand my problems and find solutions to it. How would you go about that? Let's say I sit here in your office and I'm like, Mr. Tora, I'm struggling, soon to be Dr. Tora. I'm struggling with drug addiction. But how can?
Well, it's interesting, and I again, I don't know how you do this, where you're picking things from my brain. But my wife and I both, we were both on a group that did research on USP students, and again, I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm not the best person to talk about this, but we were part of this group of psychotherapists. They did research in Fiji, and they found that Veitalanoa is such a great way for this. If you were to go into therapy, the majority of Fijians said that they would rather have Veitalanoa sessions than feeling that they were going into a therapy session. Because Veitalanoa, first, what Veitalanoa does is it helps you feel safe. You create this safe environment. Then you're able to, once you've created this safe environment and you're using Veitalanoa, you're not directly asking them questions about addiction. You're asking them to tell stories about themselves, their upbringing, their family situation, what we're doing right now. That's Veitalanoa. And through that, then you're able to understand what the root causes are. Because if you ask them directly, what's the root cause? They close themselves, they shut themselves down because they feel like you're in this position of power to do that. Because there's Veitalanoa is like sevens, it's that great equalizer. We're not looking at each other as, if I was a therapist, as a therapist and the client. You're looking at a perspective where we're both just people talking. Once we got the root cause, once we have an understanding of what may be influencing, or one of the factors that are influencing their lifestyle choice, then using Veiwekani, you can then try and get the family involved. From my personal opinion is that a lot of the interventions we're using right now is focusing only on the individual. If we can try and bring in the community, bringing in their families, their religious organizations to help them down this path of recovery, then we can do that. We can definitely do that. Which is another way our culture influences the interventions that we would rather have. The Western culture, because individualistic, focuses solely on the individual, but our culture is more communal. The individual, again, going back to my own experience with my younger days, is that I felt out of place. If we can bring the community in, bring the family in, and make that person feel like he belongs or she belongs in this community, in this family, then we could save a lot of souls. We could save a lot of people from, continuing down this path and then, passing on or reaching a point where they can't return. So, like I said, with your question, using Veitalanoa as a platform, trying to bring the community in, trying to help this individual with the help of his family, his religious organization, his community, so that we get to that sense of belonging. We restore their sense of belonging to a family, to a group, to a community.
And not to use an extreme example or paint Veitalanoa in a bad light, but police officers do this when they interrogate, the criminals, and they don't just go there and ask them, why did you kill this person? They go in there, they ask them, where did you grow up? How do you know this person? And they sort of have this, flow of conversation. And if they see that the person is trying to shut them down, they try and veer off in other forms of conversation that's not relating to the crime itself.
Yeah, I have a friend that's in the criminal investigations division, and he uses that, and he was telling me his experience using Talanoa and things, and I was telling him, you should be a therapist. But that's essentially what Veitalanoa is. It's humanizing the person. It's using that matriarchal approach that you were talking about. Getting to know that person in order to find out what really is influencing his decisions. And I like that you use that term. That analogy.
Mm-hmm. I've been watching a lot of crime documentaries in my free time, especially in uni.
True crime.
Yes. That's another aspect of the show that I really wanted to explore in the future, hopefully.
I can't wait. I'd love to watch that.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've covered quite a bit on crime here as well. It's these topics that we've discussed throughout this session. You don't, every time I've asked you a question, you don't just sit there and say, this is how it's supposed to be. This is this is that. You don't group in people into, certain identities. Although they do belong in their respective identities, but you also have a nuanced and balanced approach. Do you think we can bring nuance into individualism versus collectivism, where we don't lean too much on collectivism, but also recognize that there's also individualism involved as well? Certain people, even though they belong to certain communities and cultures, they're also their own person at the end of the day. So what do you have to say to that?
At the end of the day, when I talk about Fiji and communalism, that's the generalized system that we have. We're more communal, but at the end of the day, it is the individual making the choice. We have something in our church we call agency, where we Heavenly Father gave us agency to make the choices that we free will. Yeah, and if we're talking about interventions, use the community to to get this person to have that sense of belonging, so that then he can be able to make choices himself. If we're talking about in general, so for example, politics, one single family, they're all probably not voting for the same party here in Fiji or the same person there in the United States or in the West, where they just vote for individuals instead of parties. Individuals have their preferences. With psychology, and I believe this as well, individuals, you could have siblings, or you could even have twins that have different personalities because of a different variety of psychological and societal influences. It's called, nature or nurture. You could have the two people nurtured in the same environment with different perspectives of life, worldviews, values, and that's because it goes, at the end of the day, it goes down to the individual. Yeah, we can't. If someone does an act of violence, a crime, we can't lump the whole community with him. That's an individual choice, and that's why we need to continue to have this. I keep saying this, but this moderate approach, this nuanced approach, where we're helping the individual with the community as the support group, but the focus is on getting that individual the right help, or getting that individual the right resources. And that goes back to focusing on the collective and then humanizing the individual and recognizing that person for who he or she is. And that's something that I believe would help not just Fiji but the world in general. But in the West, it's different. Because it's such an individualized focus in terms of interventions, in terms of the world in general. We need to expand it to the community, trying to help them connect with the community. Okay. In Fiji, like you said, it's a collective, and we're trying to, humanize the person so that we focus on helping them and using the community as a resource to help them down their journey.
That reminded me of centrism, and some people would have they have a wrong definition of what centrism is. I saw this comic one time where on one side you have the KKK protesters with the torches and everything. On the other side you had the people fighting, those KKK members, you can't be racist. And then the person in the middle is saying, I have to find a middle ground between both of them. And they define that as centrism. When in fact, I personally believe that is anything but centrism. Centrism is not having a middle ground, but taking out the good from every aspect of life. Do you think more people need to be centrist?
I think the world in general needs to be needs to practice that, or needs to focus on that as philosophy, centrism. The world in general. In Fiji, we need it more than anywhere else in the world, I feel, because we are so focused on separation. We are so focused on living within our different boxes that when we are given the choice, this spectrum, the KKK and the mob that's trying to fight the KKK, because we live so much in these boxes, we feel like that's the middle ground of what the spectrum is. It's not.
It's left versus right.
Left versus right. What we should be doing is trying to get out of our own box, try and understand the other person's perspective, and then living in between that space, between that box, and trying to get the good from each, trying to find a way to establish a society as a whole that has values, that has a collection of both sides, like which is what you've defined centrism as perfectly. I feel like Fijians in general need to just step out of their box, step out of their comfort zone, and learn from everyone else. Which I feel is you're doing a great job with with leading the charge in this. With the podcast, you're able to get that. You're able to get that experience where you ask people of different beliefs, different perspectives, worldviews about their thoughts. If I were to give a suggestion, I'd say that everyone should probably start a podcast or find an excuse to just get out of their comfort zone, get out of their community, and find out and learn from different communities. Because if we're talking about coming together as a community, as a nation, to move Fiji forward, these are the first steps. Getting out of your community and actually understanding what the other side is thinking, what the other organization, the other political movement, the other community, the other religious institute, what they're thinking, so that we're able to then understand our place in it, how we can improve our own personal beliefs, how we can expand that, and then figuring out how to get other people to actually feel and think the same way that you're doing, where you're opening them, broadening them horizons, opening their mindsets.
And for those of you listening, all it takes is just a phone and a camera,
or two phones in this case.
Yeah. You've probably heard of the horseshoe theory in politics, where you have, where we look at the left and the right as a linear spectrum, but then the horseshoe theory, and I'm not saying I believe in that theory, it's just a topic of discussion, where you have the left and then it comes back to the right. You have both extremes that, even though they aren't connected to each other, they're still on the same side of things, where they take it really extreme, I guess you could say.
I like that, yeah.
And from this discussion, I think it should be necessary for people to discuss and talk it out without having that spirit of ad hominem, where you attack the other person. You take the ideas and you combat those ideas. If you disagree with them, you combat those ideas without combating the person themselves.
Yeah, with politics, U.S. politics is like the epitome of what you just talked about, where they're not attacking, and Fiji as well. Fiji is politics in general, but we're not attacking the topic. We're not attacking the issue. I think we start to devolve into attacking the person himself or herself. I think that's wrong, because what you're doing is you're personalizing that attack. Instead of trying to create a dialogue or Veitalanoa where you're actually trying to solve an issue, you've gone down the easier path of just attacking the individual that's trying to that's coming into this space of Veitalanoa to talk with you. And I feel that like what you said, we need to focus on the right things. We need to focus on the actual topics, the issues that we are all trying to solve, from whichever spectrum you're in, or whichever left or right, whichever party you're in. We all want to find a solution to this problem. It's just a matter of actually focusing on that instead of the individual.
This is something that I ask all of my guests before we wrap up. So, Alfred, let's say everything that you've done from the moment you were born, right? Your education, your higher education, your relationship with everybody, everything till this point was erased and gone. No one knew about you. No one knew what you have done. What is one message that you would leave for anyone that were to listen to this podcast?
I think one lesson or one message that I would like to leave to anyone that's listening to this is, work on that Veiwekani that I was talking about. just take a chance and just talk to someone that you probably wouldn't talk to if you just stayed in your box. Try and learn from the person. Try and have that Veitalanoa session. Try and have that. Try and go through this life with the intention of, building relationships and maintaining those relationships. If no one knew about anything that I've done, the little that I've done up until now, the message that I want to leave today is that if you can just focus on trying to understand someone different every day and focus on trying to learn something every day from whoever you meet, the world will be a better place. This nation would really be physically and emotionally and spiritually the way the world should be. If only you take time out of your day to meet someone, learn from them, have an open mind, and leave that person trying to extract at least one thing from them that you would want to implement in your life, I think the world would be a better place. So, Veiwekani. That's my message for today. Continue with Veiwekani. And Veiwekani in its totality. Coming in, learning from a person, experiencing life as best as you can from their shoes, and then trying to figure out how to maintain and preserve that relationship. That's it for me, Bila.
Thank you, Alfred, for being on the Philotical Podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Nagwaliw.